Your pro-black will sit there and talk about white supremacy, and from his perspective or her perspective, they always talk about white supremacy as regarding the white man, but they will never talk about this white woman. And one of the deadliest predators that affects Afro American children is this white female teacher, but no one will ever think about addressing her or confronting her. There was a video Mr. Superboy made a couple of days ago about this white female teacher who said that segregation should be the norm. And I sadly, as a guy who has family members in education, I can tell you that that teacher was not the exception. That teacher pretty much is the rule, and that many of these white female teachers have views about African American children that many would consider racist and offensive, but they hide them under the table. And many people don't know how dangerous this white female teacher is. Now, you'll often hear guys like David Carroll say that a that as the woman goes, so goes the race, and a race can rise no higher than the position of its woman. I'm paraphrasing here because I have to really figure. I have to go back and find out what the phrase is, what he really said. But he says something into that effect. And when it comes down to this white woman, you know, she is a teacher of culture, and the culture that she teaches, many pro-blacks, many black single mothers, and many other African American Negroes, they give it a pass, not understanding how destructive the culture that the white female teacher teaches to black children is. And this is not, and the whole thing is that she teaches this culture in addition to the academic education she teaches children. She teaches a social education to children in addition to the academic education she teaches to children. And that, this education that she teaches can be downright destructive to children. And I, as a guy who has had family members who worked in the elementary level in education and on the college level of education, they have seen the destructive patterns that these white female teachers participate in on a daily basis. And I'm going to talk about part of what they do, in this video. I mean, because my family member who worked in elementary education saw quite a bit of this, and she would just sit down and tell me, all the destructive things that these teachers would do in the classroom. And one of the things that they would do is they enable dysfunctional behaviors in children. And I can tell you this from the horror story she sat down and told me about, you know, how they deal with these children when they're acting out. And one of the things they do is they enable bad behaviors. They reinforce them by, the way they deal with things. Like when I was a kid in school, I grew up with mostly black teachers. Discipline was something we were taught from day one. We were just like, if you act out, you're going to be punished. But in a school with mostly white teachers, white female teachers, they enable behaviors because they come from a very paternalistic, I'm sorry, paternalistic and downright dysfunctional view of education. They feel that they have to feel sorry for these children, these poor children. They look at them as poor, miserable, downtrodden children. They don't see them as children who need discipline. And they don't see how discipline affects, their social education. How a social education is done is paramount to creating functional and healthy adults. What they'll do is when a kid is acting out, again, as I've stated in previous videos, they'll take the kid out of the room, they'll let him play on an iPad, they'll give him cookies and milk, they'll reward him for it or her for his bad behavior. And because they sit there and reward this child for their bad behavior, what happens is that the child believes that this is how they are supposed to get along in life. And as they get older and they ascend through the grades, they continue to think that people are just supposed to cater to them, meet their needs, and they can just act out and get whatever they want. All of this positive reinforcement of negative behavior, is very detrimental to a child. And this is why I say your white female teacher is one of the worst things you could ever have in a classroom. Because a lot of them, they follow this policy. And this is a policy here in New York. You can't discipline any child if they act out. Again, you have to go with these silly concepts such as, asking them to tell you what's wrong, asking them to use their words. And these are things that are detrimental to a child of color because when they run into another authority figure like your police officer, he's not going to ask you what's wrong. He's not going to tell you to use your words. He's going to tell you if you run up on this authority figure, you're just going to wind up either in handcuffs or in a body bag. And this is why I say, your white female teacher is very dangerous to black children, because they do not understand what this child is going through. And what's really sad is that, most Negroes, they will always talk about white supremacy, and they will give this white female teacher a pass, not understanding that this white female teacher is teaching a culture to your children that is downright destructive. And many of these teachers, as my family member has told me, have expressed contempt and anger about teaching children of color. They really don't want to be here. They really are just here for the money. And this is the way it's been even when I was in public school. But this is the way they are. They're not here to because they love teaching children or giving a kid an education. This job is just filler until they can find a rich husband or a husband who will help, who will help them finance a middle class lifestyle. They are just there, they're not there to meet the needs of the children or to educate the children. They're just there just to get that to work someplace for 20 years and collect it and eventually collect a pension. A lot of them, there's an old saying that says, "Those who can't will teach. Those who can't teach." And I will say this: those who really can't go and teach Negroes. And this is what you find in your public schools in the inner city. You find white female teachers who come to public schools looking to, make some easy money. Because the starting salary is $39,000 a year. You get a master's degree, that's an easy $39,000 a year. And eventually, if you stay long enough, if you can survive long enough, you can get bumped up to the six figures. And what happens in many of these schools with these white female teachers, and especially these white female principals, is that it turns into a sorority house, and they don't really care about educating your kids. They just see them as a bunch of monkeys and savages, and they have no regard for the people's needs of the people in the community. And I have been told, they would do passive aggressive things like setting up things. They say, a lot of parents work in the inner city. Like my family member was telling me that, look, a lot of people work, and they would say, oh, all these people are just on welfare. We can schedule, a parent workshop at 10 o'clock in the morning, not understanding that a lot of parents work. And a lot of times, this is what these white female teachers will do. They have no regard, for African American families or families of color. And that was an example of it. Because to say that, you're going to schedule something at 10 o'clock in the morning when everybody's working, a workshop, and then say, oh, these people are just on welfare, people don't see how that's a racist statement right there. And you cannot generalize like that and do things like that. And other things that these white female teachers do, in addition to enabling your child, doing passive aggressive things like scheduling workshops and meetings at odd hours, is that they will, on open parent night, they'll just gas you up and and take you for a ride. And because a lot of single mothers really just want to hear good things about their children, they don't want to hear constructive criticism about them. They just sit there and they think that this child is doing incredibly well, because the white female teacher will just sit there and tell you, "Oh, your child is doing well. Your child is doing great." Now, if you take your child and sit down and read with them or just sit down and talk to them, you'll find out that a lot of times your child is doing very poorly. But when you sit down and talk to this white female teacher, they'll pretty much tell you the child is doing spectacular. And what a lot of Negro parents don't understand is that this child is just being pushed through as a component of social promotion, one, or two, the school has a quota that they want to meet, because a lot of principals don't want to have a lot of failing students in their school, so they'll just pass a child along and fudge their grades just to get them out of there. And a lot of times, because your Negro single mother or other mothers in the community just want to hear good things about their kids, they don't wind up getting their child the help that they need. And what happens is, because these women want to hear only good things about their kids, the kids wind up being pushed through school, and then when they hit the grades 9 and 10 and they have to do real work, they start falling apart. And this is where you start seeing disaster happen regarding African American children. And I've seen this time and time again. And my family member who was in education, she would worry about it all the time, because she really wanted to educate these kids and help them take their lives to the next level. And the two barriers to that process was, one, these single mothers who were just using kids as weapons and cash cows, and two, these white female teachers who would sit there and make excuses for these children, or enable their enable and reinforce all their bad behaviors. And I really look at your public school system, and if you have a school full of white female teachers and you have a school full of Negro kids, they're pretty much screwed, because what's going to happen is many of the white female teachers, what they're going to do is, one, they're going to transmit a culture of white supremacy and white racist ideologies to those children, and two, what's going to happen is they're going to be given a substandard and shoddy education, because a lot of these teachers just want to keep their jobs, and what they're going to do is they're going to pass that kid on to the next grade, even if they don't know anything. Because if you here in New York with these new standards and guidelines, a lot of people are fudging numbers regarding students' grades, and they'll say that a kid is on a level H when he's actually on a level D, and they'll do that just so they can make the numbers look good, and they'll say kids are doing something that they're not doing, and they won't hold the child back. They won't hold children back that need to be held back, even though well, Common Ferini right now has pretty much gotten rid of it and brought back social promotion under the table. But they'll do things to, you know, hurt children in the long term. Where a lot of parents are just sitting up there clapping, thinking that their kids are doing well. Oh, he's done so well, but you're really being sold a bill of goods regarding this child's education, and a lot of it partially has to do with these white female teachers, but the other part has to do with this Negro and how inactive they are in being involved in their own schools. If you ask a lot of these parents what their teacher's name is, they pretty much, some of them can't even tell you that. If you ask them, what class they're in, they can't even tell you that. If you ask them, what books has your child read, they can't tell you that. Um, if you ask them have they visited their school on any day outside of open school night, they won't be able to tell you. I mean, most regular parents were actively involved. I mean, they won't even go to a PTA meeting. They won't even go, even to a class workshop. Most of these Negro parents will sit there and then say, you know, why can't my child read? And they're at the 7th or 8th grade, and then they hit the wall, and then they're wondering what happened. But you weren't there. You didn't go to the school to find out what was going on in that classroom, what was going on at that school, and you just gave these white females carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to your children. And they were shaping this child's education and molding it and sending them, on a road to ruin and a fast track to prison. But because you didn't take an active role, this is what happened. And another thing that, especially this regards black males in the classroom, many of your white female teachers will purposefully put your child on a fast track to special education, because again, special education, and this is not just because one part is because they don't like black boys. The other part is school gets more money per capita when they have to put a child in special education. When you have to put a child in special education, you get more dollars for your school than you would. And the easiest way to do that is to put the black boys on that track. And this is one of the things that your white female teacher will do. But, all these things go on in your public schools with these white females in charge. But Negro will never challenge this. He will never, set up a protest for it, especially your pro-blacks. They'll sit there and talk about white supremacy. But this form of white supremacy is going on right in front of him. This is a culture that is being taught to your children every day by these white female teachers, and he won't sit down and say, we need black female teachers or we need black male teachers for the public schools. He won't make a campaign for this, but he'll sit there and talk about white supremacy, and this white supremacy is going on right now in your public schools. And your white female teacher will sit there and give a black child a substandard education and collect checks for 20 years, and the Negro community will have to deal with the bitter harvest from the fruits that are planted in these public schools, and no one will bat an eyelash in the Negro community. You won't hear a word from your Al Sharpton. You won't hear a word from your NAACP. You won't hear a word from your civil rights organizations. You won't hear a word from your National Organization for Women. You won't hear a word from your Oprah Winfrey. None of these people will say a word about what's going on in your public schools right now regarding these white female teachers. I mean, the white female is one of the deadliest predators, as I've said. when it comes to race in America, and she gets a free pass from all your African American civil rights leaders and all your African American politicians and your African American businessmen, and they'll give her that free pass because you know they don't see her as a threat. Many of these guys are just pretty much dysfunctional, especially the pro-blacks. They're pretty much dysfunctional, and they don't see the danger of having your children taught by a white female, and they don't see that. If the black woman is a teacher of culture, then so is the white woman. And the culture that your white woman is teaching your black kids is white supremacy and racism for the most part. And what you're learning in these schools pretty much is destructive because as one of my family members who was in school, she saw it firsthand. She saw the cognitive distortion firsthand. She saw the racism firsthand. She saw how children were learning that black had no authority and no power. And she was, a teacher in the classroom. And when she would command a child to do something, the child would resist. But when the white woman would come into the room, the child would automatically become compliant and submissive. And that pretty much showed me, the the race issue, firsthand. I had to sit down and tell her that, look, that had nothing to do with you. That had to do with, the white supremacist concepts and the transmission and the culture being transmitted to them, and also had to do with the cognitive distortion because a lot of these Negroes from birth they believe that again the white man's ice is always colder, white people are authority figures, and that you always submit to a white person in an authority position. And they don't want to acknowledge the black person in that type of authority figure and authority position. Now, the way I grew up, because I grew up in a different era in the late 1970s, early 1980s, this is when I went to elementary school. Now, I saw black people in authority positions, and I saw black people in leadership positions, and I learned to acknowledge their authority on an equal level as the white people's authority. And that's the way I learned and I grew up. But a lot of kids today are not getting that because they go to predominantly schools with predominantly white female teachers, and those white female teachers are teaching these kids a culture that is destructive and detrimental to them. Um, and it's even worse because of all the enabling that they do, because they have a very paternalistic view of these kids. They feel sorry for them, so they give them a pass for all sorts of bad behavior and all sorts of dysfunctional behaviors. They give them all sorts of cookies and treats and let them play on computers when they should be learning. They don't see how, discipline and structure are paramount to creating functional adults, and they don't understand that these passes that you give this child today, will turn into barriers tomorrow to this child's growth and development. And I see, this is why I see all these problems coming up because she was telling me all this stuff that was going on in the school that she had worked at. And I'm just trying to relay it to you guys here in this video so that you can get up and do something about it because you need to say to yourself, we need black teachers in this school. Because there are black teachers, there are licensed and certified black teachers, but a lot of times they can't get in because what happens is a lot of the white females, what they'll do is create a wall based in gender and race and use that to keep black female teachers out, Hispanic female teachers out, and Asian teachers out, and then also, form their little sorority and then create a hostile environment so that the people of color, feel like they're so verbally and physically abused every day that they've pretty much quit. And this is the type of stuff, black people need to start fighting against because if these people are teaching your kids and they're teaching your kids a culture, that culture is detrimental and destructive to your kids. And if you really want to get, because the education is the foundation for everything, and it's paramount that you get your kids a great education. It's paramount that your kids see people of color in these type of positions because it prepares them for life. When you see a teacher of color, it shows you that there's a black person in an authority figure. You see a black person in a leadership position, and you learn how to submit and defer to black authority. Or if you're other races, you start seeing that. But if you only see white faces, then you learn that the only authorities in a school are white. And if you only see a black person, in a janitorial, the only black person you see is the janitor, then you learn not to regard black people as authority figures at a young age. Now, thank God, I was able to be in classes where we were predominant, where I had black teachers, and I worked with, and I was able to have classes with black teachers and see black people as authority figures. And I want kids to see that too, because it's very important for you to have, schools with black authority figures and black teachers and even black people on the PTA or black people, on the school board, because this is some things that you need to know about, because these all these decisions, impact your child's education, which impact your child's future. And a lot of people are too busy, worrying about Jay-Z and Beyonce or whatever nonsense some celebrity is involved in, to focus on matters like education, which are truly important and should be, a primary priority for everyone, because having a school in an inner city neighborhood with all white teachers is a dangerous thing, because the culture that's the social education that kids are getting is more destructive than the dysfunctional academic education that they're being given, because people feel sorry for them. They want to fudge numbers for them. They give them treats and stuff. They reinforce all sorts of bad behaviors. They don't have high expectations for children. One of the things thank God I was happy for, is that people did have high expectations of me, and they did demand better of the work that I was supposed to do as a kid. And that's what pushes me today to continue to try to produce, high quality books like I have been publishing over the last few years, because of that academic education I got. People never People from my parents to my teachers never asked me to do accepted substandard from me. They always demanded the best, and that was one of the things that was drilled into me, from a child, that you always bring your best to the table. But when it comes down to Negroes today, they're not demanding the best, and they're not. And the whole thing is that they're taking the snow job given that to them by these white female teachers, and being told that, oh, he's doing well, when the child is not doing well. When you can just take that child outside, ask them to do a simple math problem in a grocery store where they add up. I give you $5. I ask you to buy two different things, and then you don't even know how much they cost. Or I ask you to divide 25% of a price, and you still don't understand what this is. It shows me that, yeah, they fudge the grades, but this child cannot apply any of the knowledge presented to them. I mean, this is something that you really have to do something about. And the whole thing is that many of these Negroes, they don't want to get involved in their child's education. They don't want to get involved with their child's school. They don't want to get involved with their child's PTA meetings. They're too busy focusing on nonsense to focus on things that are incredibly important, because your child's education not only has an impact on their future, but your future as well, because who's going to take care of you in the future? And many Negroes, they're not focusing, their eyes on the prize. They're pretty much, a lot of people think that education, is something that they take for granted. Some people even think that, trying to get an education is acting white, but when you put your education in the hands of somebody else, it's never a good thing. And when you give these white female teachers a pass, you're giving everyone a pass to destroy you, and you're just pretty much destroying yourself, because you cannot expect somebody else to educate you when you need to take your education in your own hands. And this is something Negro people have not been doing for the last 20, 25 years. I mean, I remember, again, I was in a school, elementary school. Most of the teachers were black. When I was in high school, I was working with black teachers. And now you look at these environments, like my family members told me, 97, 98% white females. She was the only black female in the entire school. They had one mixed Hispanic person, and that was it. And this is supposed to be a predominantly Hispanic, black, and African neighborhood, but 97% of the teachers are white, and nobody bats an eyelash and says, look, where's the diversity? And this is happening in many schools, and nobody's ever asking a question. Where are the black teachers? Where are the black academic professionals? And even on the college level, nobody's asking that question. Where are the black professors? Where are the black teachers? Because all you're going to learn in these classrooms, in addition to a dysfunctional academic education, is a more dysfunctional social education of white supremacy, and that the only authority is white authority. You never learn how to submit and defer to black people, and authority figures, and then you wind up, winding up in a mess, because, again, because these white females enable and reinforce bad behaviors in them, because they feel sorry for them. When these kids run up against real authority figures, they never learn how to deal, with social situations. They never learn how to deal with authority figures. They never learn how to, take responsibility for their actions, because this white female teacher has been sitting there enabling this kid, or they've been making racist statements, behind the kid's back, so they express a lot of contempt to them. or they, grade them on a more biased curve. They do all sorts of things, to hurt your kids. But if you were there to take your education into your own hands and, ask for that black teacher, one, and two, just be actively involved in the school, your child's education could be a lot better and you could be getting a lot more benefits from their education. Um, but I know, again, I made this video because I really want people to understand, what goes on in your public schools regarding your kids with these white female teachers, because it's not a conducive environment to learning for black kids, and most of your African American people are so busy, talking about other things that they're not focusing on this serious issue because these white female teachers are there and they're teaching this culture of racism and white supremacy to your children on a daily basis. And your children are learning cognitive distortion every day as in this white female's presence. And everybody's just, they're just giving this a pass and they don't see how destructive this is to your child long term. Um, that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.